In 1978, All Creatures Great and Small showed us warmth, humor, and simple countryside life. But nearly 5 decades later, the cast's real lives tell a far darker story. From shocking health battles to quiet disappearances, time changed them in ways no one expected. Let's uncover their real names, real ages, and honor the legacies they left behind. Christopher Timothy as James Herriot. Christopher Timothy was born on 14 October 1940 in Bala, Merionethshire, Wales. At 38 years old, he played James Herriot, the gentle country veterinarian in All Creatures Great and Small. His warmth and sincerity anchored the series, turning everyday farm visits into deeply human television. That calm on screen came from a childhood that never felt settled. Moving constantly because his father was a priest, Timothy changed schools often and struggled to belong, especially while being mocked for his Welsh accent. Those years taught him silence and observation. These traits later surfaced in his early stage work and television roles such as Take 3 Girls and UFO. Success placed pressure on his marriage. Timothy married Annie Wilson in 1965, but as All Creatures Great and Small dominated his life, the relationship fractured and ended in divorce in 1982. During that same period, he became emotionally entangled with his on-screen partner, a situation that intensified the fallout before he later remarried Susan Boys, with whom he raised 6 children while his career slowed and shifted toward voice work and series like Doctors. Another shock arrived in 2008. Timothy was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and months of chemotherapy and radiotherapy left him drained and vulnerable. Even so, he continued narrating projects such as The Yorkshire Vet, later speaking openly about the illness and encouraging men to seek early testing, turning private suffering into public purpose. Today, Christopher Timothy is 86 years old. He lives a quieter life, still recording audiobooks and occasional narration, choosing meaningful work over visibility. With an estimated net worth of around $5 million, his story now feels less like a television success and more like a survival tale shaped by fame, broken relationships, and a disease he refused to let define the ending. Robert Hardy as Siegfried Farnan. Robert Hardy was born on 29 October 1925 in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, England. At 53 years old, he played Siegfried Farnan, the volatile senior veterinarian in All Creatures Great and Small. His explosive authority injected tension into the series, giving it sharp edges beneath its pastoral charm. That intensity had roots in a harsh early world. Growing up during World War II, Hardy lived with constant disruption, strict discipline at home, and the fear that followed evacuation and air raids. Those experiences hardened his focus, later visible in commanding performances on the Shakespearean stage and powerful screen roles like Edward VII and The Troubleshooters. While his career surged, his marriages faltered. Hardy first married Elizabeth Fox in 1952, but financial strain and infidelity ended the union within 4 years. His second marriage to Sally Pearson lasted longer and produced children, yet collapsed in 1986 as demanding roles, including Winston Churchill, The Wilderness Years, and The Shooting Party, consumed his time and energy. Age brought its own battles. Hardy developed serious heart disease and advanced arthritis, pain that steadily limited his movement and forced him into a wheelchair. Even then, he continued working, appearing memorably as Cornelius Fudge in the Harry Potter films, his voice and presence undiminished. Sadly, he died on the 3rd of August, 2017, aged 91, from complications related to age and chronic illness. He passed away at Denville Hall, a respected home for retired actors, surrounded by the quiet legacy of British theater and television. With an estimated net worth of $10 million, he left behind a life marked by authority, brilliance, and a final act defined not by applause, but by endurance. Peter Davison as Tristan Farnan. Peter Davison was born on the 13th of April, 1951, in Streatham, London, England. At 27 years old, he played Tristan Farnan, the charming and impulsive younger veterinarian in All Creatures Great and Small. His playful energy brought humor and emotional contrast to the series, making Tristan a fan favorite rather than just comic relief. That lightness masked a difficult upbringing. Raised in a working-class household with a Guyanese immigrant father, Davison faced racism and bullying at school. Music and amateur theater became refuge, later guiding him through early roles such as Love for Lydia and sitcoms like Holding the Fort. Fame complicated his personal life. In 1978, he married actress Sandra Dickinson, and as his profile rose with Doctor Who and All Creatures Great and Small, long absences and cultural differences strained the marriage. Their divorce in 1994 coincided with intense pressure from his time as the Fifth Doctor, even as acclaimed work like A Very Peculiar Practice earned him a BAFTA nomination. The aftermath took a toll on his mental health. Davison struggled with depression and anxiety, particularly after the divorce, and sought psychological treatment while continuing to work on stage and television. Roles in At Home with the Braithwaites and later audio dramas for Doctor Who allowed him to rebuild balance without the weight of global spotlight. Now, Peter Davison is 75 years old. He remains active in theater, television, and audiobook narration, and continues to revisit his most iconic roles with perspective rather than pressure. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, his story feels defined not by fame alone, but by endurance through quiet battles few ever saw. Lynda Bellingham as Helen Harriet. Lynda Bellingham was born on 31st May, 1948, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. At 40 years old, she played Helen Harriet, the steadfast, emotional anchor of the veterinary household in All Creatures Great and Small. Her grounded performance reshaped the series' domestic heart, bringing maturity and realism to its later seasons. Her strength on screen grew from a fragile beginning. Given up for adoption as an infant, Bellingham was raised in England by strict adoptive parents and educated at boarding school, where emotional neglect and abuse left lasting scars. Acting became both escape and proof of worth, leading to early roles and later recognition in shows like Second Thoughts and The Bill. Marriage brought little peace. Her first marriage to Nunzio Peluso ended quickly after domestic violence, a trauma she hid while presenting a composed public image. Her second marriage to Greg Smith collapsed in 1996 amid infidelity, even as she was widely known as the comforting face of the OXO adverts and later a regular on Loose Women. Her third marriage to Michael Pattamore in 2008 offered stability, though illness soon overshadowed it. In 2013, Bellingham was diagnosed with advanced colorectal cancer. Chemotherapy drained her strength, and as the disease spread, she chose to stop treatment to reclaim time with her family. During this period, she wrote, "There's something I've been dying to tell you." Sadly, she died on the 19th of October 2014, aged 66, in a London hospital, with her husband by her side. She was buried at Crewkerne Townsend Cemetery, her gravestone bearing the name Lynda Bellingham Pattamore. With an estimated net worth of $2 million, she left behind a legacy of honesty, warmth, and a final act defined by dignity rather than fear. Carol Drinkwater as Helen Harriet. Carol Drinkwater was born on 22nd April 1948 in London, England. At 30 years old, she played Helen Harriet, the quietly strong farmer's daughter who becomes the emotional center of the practice in All Creatures Great and Small. Her natural warmth reshaped the tone of the series, turning pastoral stories into intimate family drama. That poise was earned early. Raised in a constantly moving household because of her father's work as a musician, Drinkwater struggled to form lasting friendships and lived with a sense of instability. As a teenager, pressure over appearance led to a mild eating disorder, and acting became both escape and control, opening doors to roles in A Clockwork Orange and later Father, Dear Father. The height of her fame collided with emotional turbulence. While portraying Helen, Drinkwater became romantically involved with her on-screen husband, Christopher Timothy, a relationship that drew intense public scrutiny. In 1980, she married French television producer Michel Noll, and although cultural differences tested them early, the marriage endured and ultimately drew her away from England and into a quieter life in France. Leaving the series in 1985 proved devastating. A dispute with the BBC led to her being unofficially sidelined, cutting short her acting momentum. Around the same time, she began battling rheumatoid arthritis, a painful condition that restricted movement and forced her to reconsider a career built on physical endurance. Now, Carol Drinkwater is 78 years old. She lives in Provence, writing best-selling memoirs and novels such as The Olive Farm and producing travel documentaries, having rebuilt her life far from television studios. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, her story stands as one of reinvention after exile, choosing authorship and land over applause. Mary Hignett as Mrs. Hall. Mary Hignett was born on 31st March 1916 in Madras, British India. At 62 years old, she played Mrs. Hall, the sharp-tongued housekeeper who held the practice together in all creatures great and small. Her presence grounded the series in routine and order, giving warmth, authority, and humor weight. Her strength came from hardship. Born into a military family in colonial India, Hignett endured harsh conditions, tropical illness, and the early death of her mother, forcing her return to England at a young age. Those losses shaped a tough exterior that later defined her work in comedies like The Liverbirds and darker films such as Demons of the Mind. Love brought little stability. She married actor Michael Brennan, but wartime separation and long absences fractured the relationship, ending in divorce. Even so, Hignett continued working relentlessly, taking roles well into her 60s to maintain independence in an industry that offered little security to aging actresses. Behind the scenes, her health was failing. Years of exhaustion compounded underlying heart disease, and after completing the third season of All Creatures Great and Small, she suffered complications following risky medical treatment. The decline was sudden, leaving colleagues shocked by how quickly her condition worsened. Finally, she died on the 6th of July, 1980, aged 64, from heart-related complications. She was cremated at Chichester Crematorium, with her All Creatures co-stars in attendance, and her death was later written into the series as a tribute. With an estimated net worth of around $500,000, her legacy rests not in wealth, but in a final role that made her unforgettable just before time ran out. John McGlynn as Callum Buchanan. John McGlynn was born on the 8th of September 1953 in Scotland. At 35 years old, he played Callum Buchanan, the steady, modern-minded veterinarian in All Creatures Great and Small. His arrival refreshed the series, introducing a quieter strength that contrasted with the older generation and subtly shifted its emotional rhythm. That restraint grew out of hardship. Raised in rural Scotland in a poor household, McGlynn grew up with an alcoholic father and frequent domestic violence, forcing him to leave school early. Theater and music became a lifeline, first at the Royal High School in Edinburgh and later on stage, leading to early work with companies like 784 and roles that sharpened his realism long before television fame. As his career expanded, so did resistance to his voice. Moving to London, McGlynn repeatedly faced prejudice against his strong Scottish accent, limiting casting opportunities despite his talent. Even so, he broke through with long-running crime drama Taggart and later appearances in Silent Witness and The Queen. Unlike many peers, his private life found stability. McGlynn married Jan Waters, and their marriage remained supportive and grounded, a rare constant amid an unpredictable industry. With 2 children and a focus on steady work rather than stardom, he avoided the personal collapses that often followed success. By 2026, John McGlynn is 73 years old. He continues to work selectively in television, theater, and music, choosing roles that respect his roots. With an estimated net worth of around $2 million, his story feels quietly powerful. Margaretta Scott as Mrs. Pumphrey. Margaretta Scott was born on the 13th of February 1912 in Westminster, London, England. At 66 years old, she played Mrs. Pumphrey, the eccentric, fragile widow devoted to her dog Tricky Woo in All Creatures Great and Small. Her whimsical presence added gentle absurdity to the series, balancing humor with loneliness and making Mrs. Pumphrey unforgettable. Her composure masked early strain. Growing up during World War I, Scott watched her family's finances collapse, creating anxiety that followed her into adulthood. Acting became discipline and escape, leading to an early breakthrough in Things to Come, 1936, and a respected stage career rooted in Shakespeare long before television embraced her. Marriage brought little refuge. Scott married Frederick Scott, but infidelity fractured the relationship and ended it in divorce, leaving her emotionally guarded. She poured herself into work instead, returning repeatedly to stage and screen, including demanding theater schedules that left little space for rest as she aged. In later years, her health declined quietly. Scott developed Alzheimer's disease, gradually losing memory and independence while withdrawing from public life. The condition softened a woman once known for precision and wit, marking a slow and painful retreat from the craft she had mastered. Margaretta Scott died on the 15th of April 2005, aged 93, from complications of old age. She was buried alongside her husband at St. Lawrence's Church, Colesbury, her long life closing far from the spotlight. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, her legacy rests not in wealth, but in a final role that turned fragility into enduring charm. James Grout as Granville Bennett. James Grout was born on 22nd October 1927 in London, England. At 51 years old, he played Granville Bennett, the reserved and authoritative official in All Creatures Great and Small. Though a recurring role, his controlled presence added realism and quiet tension to the rural world of the series. That restraint came from an unsettled beginning. Grout grew up during the Great Depression, when his family's finances collapsed and stability disappeared almost overnight. The loss of security pushed him toward discipline and study, eventually leading him to train at RADA. Marriage, however, brought calm rather than conflict. Grout married Noreen, his school sweetheart, and their relationship remained strong and supportive throughout his life. While his career grew steadily with work in radio and television, including Rumpole of the Bailey and Yes Minister, his home life stayed deliberately private and grounded. Illness arrived late but decisively. Grout was diagnosed with lung cancer, a condition that slowly weakened him while he withdrew from public appearances. Even as his health declined, his earlier work continued to air regularly, especially his most famous role as Chief Superintendent Strange in Inspector Morse. Finally, he died on 24th June 2012, aged 84, after a long illness. He passed away at a nursing home in Wiltshire. His wife was next to him all that time. With an estimated net worth of around $1.5 million, his legacy rests in authority roles defined by intelligence, restraint, and quiet gravity. Teddy Turner as Hodgkin. Teddy Turner was born on the 13th of June, 1917, in Yorkshire, England. At 61 years old, he played Hodgkin, the loyal and soft-spoken servant in All Creatures Great and Small. His understated performance brought warmth and class contrast to the series, turning a background character into a familiar, comforting presence. His humility was forged early. Raised in a poor mining community, Turner grew up surrounded by hard labor and limited opportunity. Leaving school young, he absorbed the rhythms of working-class life, experiences that later shaped his naturalistic performances in long-running shows such as Coronation Street and Emmerdale. Family life offered stability. Turner married and raised 3 children, maintaining a steady home even as acting work remained unpredictable. While he became a recognizable face on television through roles in Never the Twain and Open All Hours, fame never disrupted his domestic life. Health problems shadowed his later years. Years of physical strain and age-related illness weakened him, and although he continued working, his strength gradually declined. His final screen appearances carried a quiet fragility that mirrored his real condition. Teddy Turner died on 29 August 1992, aged 75, following a road accident, bringing an abrupt end to a long working life. He passed away in Yorkshire, close to where he had begun. With an estimated net worth of around $800,000, he left behind a legacy defined not by stardom, but by authenticity and a face audiences trusted for decades. Jean Heywood as Mrs. Alton. Jean Heywood was born on the 15th of July, 1921, in Blyth, Northumberland, England. At 69 years old, she played Mrs. Alton, the sharp-eyed, quietly judgmental village woman in All Creatures Great and Small, joining the series in its later run. Her brief presence added social realism, reflecting the watchful, memory-filled countryside the show was built upon. That realism came from loss early in life. Heywood grew up during wartime upheaval, losing her father young and learning to survive in a world shaped by absence and uncertainty. These experiences hardened her resolve and fed into later performances in working-class dramas such as When the Boat Comes In and Boys from the Black Stuff. Marriage brought companionship, but also grief. Heywood married Roland Heywood, and together they raised a family, but she was widowed in 1996, a loss that quietly altered her later years. Even so, she continued acting, appearing in productions like The Bill and Casualty. In her final years, Heywood faced Alzheimer's disease, a slow erosion of memory that stood in painful contrast to a career built on sharp observation. As the illness progressed, she withdrew from acting, cared for by family as recognition gradually faded. Jean Heywood died on the 14th of September 2019, aged 98, from complications related to old age. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, her legacy endures through performances that honored ordinary lives marked by quiet endurance rather than spectacle. John Sharp as Biggins. John Sharp was born on the 5th of August 1920 in Bradford, West Yorkshire, England. At 58 years old, he played Ezra Biggins, the miserly, awkward Yorkshire farmer in All Creatures Great and Small. His portrayal injected dry humor and stubborn realism into the series, making Biggins both exasperating and strangely endearing. That authenticity was forged in an industrial childhood. Raised in a working-class city shaped by mills and early labor, Sharp learned endurance young, leaving school early to work. Acting offered escape, leading to a long career across stage and screen, including films like The Wicker Man and steady television work throughout the 1960s and 1970s. Family life remained steady behind the scenes. Sharp married and raised 2 children, maintaining a grounded home life while appearing in dozens of productions. Even as his face became familiar through recurring television roles, he avoided celebrity excess, treating acting as labor rather than glamour. Health challenges followed with age. Sharp developed heart disease, a condition that increasingly limited his stamina while he continued working into his 70s. Sadly, he died on the 26th of November 1992, aged 72, from heart-related complications. He passed away in London, closing a career that spanned more than 4 decades. With an estimated net worth of around $700,000, he left behind a legacy of character work rooted in truth, grit, and the dignity of ordinary people. Joan Davies as Mrs. Dalby. Joan Davies was born on the 14th of September 1927 in Wakefield, Yorkshire, England. At 51 years old, she played Mrs. Dalby, the sharp-eyed, no-nonsense village woman in All Creatures Great and Small. Though a recurring role, her presence strengthened the series' sense of social realism. showing how tightly knit rural communities could be both warm and unforgiving. Her working discipline was shaped early. Growing up in Yorkshire in the shadow of the Depression, Davies entered adulthood during a period when steady acting work was rare and competition fierce. She learned to accept smaller parts without complaint, building a reputation for reliability that kept her employed across British television for decades. That persistence paid off in visibility rather than stardom. Alongside All Creatures Great and Small, she became widely recognized as Mrs. Pike in Dad's Army, while also appearing in shows like Dixon of Dock Green and Z-Cars. These roles demanded precision and restraint, and Davies mastered the art of being memorable without dominating the frame. In the mid-1980s, her career was still active when illness intervened. Diagnosed with breast cancer, she continued working as long as her strength allowed, even as the disease progressed aggressively and spread to her lungs, cutting short further opportunities. He died on September 22, 1986, aged 59, from complications of cancer. With an estimated net worth of around $400,000, she left behind a career defined by consistency and quiet impact, proof that supporting actors often carry the emotional weight of television history. Andrea Gibb as Deirdre McEwen. Andrea Gibb was born around 1960 in Greenock, Scotland. At 30 years old, she played Deirdre McEwen, the thoughtful and principled civil servant in All Creatures Great and Small. Her role subtly shifted the series' tone, introducing a more contemporary voice into its traditional rural setting. At that stage, acting was only the beginning. Gibb trained rigorously and worked steadily on stage and television, but opportunities were uneven, and meaningful roles were limited. While appearing in All Creatures Great and Small, she began observing scripts more critically, sensing gaps she felt compelled to fill herself. That realization marked a turning point. Acting gradually gave way to writing, a move that required stepping back from visibility to start again from the margins. Early screenplays struggled for attention, yet her persistence sharpened her voice and deepened her storytelling instincts. Breakthrough arrived with Dear Frankie and Afterlife, projects that earned international acclaim and major award recognition. Today, Andrea Gibb is around 66 years old. She continues developing film and television projects, working behind the scenes where creative control matters most. With an estimated net worth of about $1.5 million, her career stands as a rare arc, from supporting actress to award-winning storyteller who reshaped her own path. Time has changed faces, voices, and lives, but the legacy of All Creatures Great and Small, 1978, still lingers in every memory it left behind. Which cast member's journey surprised you the most? And whose story moved you in ways you didn't expect? If you enjoyed this, then and now. 2026 Look Back. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. More unforgettable stories are waiting.